The grand chamber was silent, except for the soft hum of translation devices. Jiwan Park sat in the human delegation seat, her hands folded on the smooth metal desk before her. Around her, rising in curved tiers like an ancient amphitheater, sat representatives from 847 different species. Some had faces she could almost understand. Others were so alien that even after 15 years as a diplomat, she still couldn't read their expressions. High above, in the central platform that floated on anti-gravity fields, stood Velmathos. The Velcrin was old, perhaps 3,000 years if the records were correct. Its body was covered in silver scales that caught the light from the chamber's artificial sun. When it spoke, its voice echoed through every translator in the room. "We are gathered today to address a threat to galactic peace," Velmathos said. "The species known as humanity has shown dangerous tendencies. They build weapons. They expand their military forces. They refuse to cooperate with Council security protocols." Jiwan didn't move. She'd expected this. For months, there had been whispers in the diplomatic channels, complaints, concerns. The word belligerent had appeared in 17 different reports from Council members. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed human warships, dozens of them, moving in formation near the colony world of New Sol. The ships were new, their hulls still gleaming. Each one carried enough firepower to crack a moon. 47 colony worlds, another voice said. This one belonged to a Threen representative, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish made of blue light. 47 worlds, each surrounded by military installations, weapons platforms, missile batteries. This is not the behavior of a peaceful species. Jiwan watched as more images appeared. Defense stations, shipyards, training facilities, everything humanity had built in the last 15 years. "We have laws," Velmathos continued. "Laws that maintain peace across this galaxy. Laws that prevent the kind of warfare that nearly destroyed civilizations before the Council was formed. Humanity ignores these laws. They build fleets in secret. They fortify their borders. They act as if they are preparing for war." A murmur ran through the chamber. Jiwan could hear the translations overlapping, creating a sound like distant thunder. Some delegates were nodding. Others were watching her, waiting for her reaction. She gave them nothing. Her face remained calm, almost serene. Inside, her heart was pounding, but she'd learned long ago not to let her emotions show in this place. Lieutenant Minho Choi sat beside her. He was young, only 28, with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent his whole adult life in the military. His jaw was clenched so tight that Jiwan worried he might crack a tooth. She placed a hand on his arm, gentle but firm, a reminder to stay calm. "The Council has tried to work with humanity," Velmathos said. "We have offered guidance. We have offered protection under Council security forces. We have offered membership in the Collective Defense Network. Every offer has been refused." That was technically true, Jiwan thought. They had made offers. Offers that would have required humanity to dismantle their fleet. Offers that would have placed Council observers on every human world. Offers that were less like partnership and more like surrender. "Therefore," Velmathos raised one scaled arm, "the Council must take action. For the safety of all species, for the preservation of peace, we propose that humanity be placed under protective supervision." The words hung in the air. Protective supervision. It sounded almost gentle, almost kind. But Jiwan knew what it meant. Council ships in human space. Council oversight of human government. Council approval required for every decision. It meant the end of human independence. Minho's tablet buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. He turned the screen toward Jiwan, his hand shaking slightly. The message was short. 3 human colony ships had been stopped by Council enforcement vessels near the border of human territory. The ships were carrying 12,000 civilians, families moving to the outer colonies. They were being held, detained for security verification. Jiwon read the message twice. The timing was too perfect. The council had planned this. Stop the ships just before the vote. Show humanity that the council could reach them anywhere, anytime. "We understand this is difficult," another delegate spoke up. This one was Haxian, a species that resembled a massive insect with too many legs. "But it is necessary. Young species often struggle to understand the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. The Council has guided many species through this transition." Young species. Jiwon had heard that phrase 100 times. Humanity had been traveling in space for less than a century. They'd only met the Council 80 years ago. To species that measured their histories in millennia, humans were infants. "Tomorrow," Velmathos announced, "we will vote on the supervision measure. But we are fair. We are just. Ambassador Park will be given the opportunity to address this council, to explain humanity's actions, to accept our guidance." The emphasis on that last part was clear. This wasn't really a chance to argue. This was a chance to submit gracefully. The session ended with a chime, the same musical note that closed every council meeting. Delegates began to rise, moving toward the exits in their various ways. Some walked, some floated, some slithered. Jiwon remained seated. She looked up at the empty central platform where Velmathos had stood. Tomorrow, she would stand there. Tomorrow, she would speak to the entire council, to billions watching across the galaxy. "Ambassador," Minho whispered urgently, "what are we going to do?" Jiwon stood slowly. She gathered her papers, her movements deliberate and calm. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but certain. "Tomorrow, Lieutenant, I'm going to tell them the truth." She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Behind her, the holographic displays still showed human warships, human defenses, human strength. The evidence of humanity's supposed crime. But tomorrow, she thought, they would see the evidence of something else entirely. Jiwon's quarters on the diplomatic station were small but comfortable. She sat at her desk, surrounded by holographic screens that floated in the air around her. Each screen showed a different piece of history, a different memory of how humanity had arrived at this moment. The first screen showed old footage from 80 years ago. A human ship, small and primitive by current standards, making first contact with a council patrol vessel. Jiwon had watched this recording 100 times. The excitement in the human captain's voice. The wonder. Humanity had finally found proof that they weren't alone in the universe. The council had welcomed them. Curious newcomers, they'd called humans. Energetic, enthusiastic, full of potential. Jiwon moved to the next screen. She saw images of early human colonies, worlds where humans had settled with council blessing. New Jeju had been one of them, a beautiful planet with 2 moons and oceans that sparkled blue and green. 2 million humans had lived there, building cities, raising families, dreaming of a future among the stars. Then came the creche. Jiwon's hand trembled as she opened the file. Even after 15 years, it was hard to look at. The creche Dominion had swept into human space without warning. They were conquerors, a species that had grown by taking what others built. They'd seen human colonies as easy targets. New Jeju burned first. The footage was grainy, taken by civilian cameras before the communications array was destroyed. Jiwon watched as creche warships appeared in the sky. She watched as the first strikes hit the capital city. She watched as buildings collapsed and people ran screaming through streets filled with fire and smoke. She paused the recording. She couldn't watch the rest. She'd seen it too many times already. Humanity had screamed for help. They'd sent messages to the council, begging for intervention. The creche were violating council law, attacking a protected species. Surely the council would respond. The council had called an emergency session. They debated, and debated, and debated some more. 6 months. It took them 6 months to decide what to do. By then, 3 more colonies had fallen. 2.3 million humans were dead. Jiwon opened another file, this one showing council session transcripts from that time. She read the arguments. Some species wanted to help. Others said the human colonies were in disputed territory. Others argued that military intervention would set a bad precedent. Still others suggested that humanity should simply abandon those worlds and retreat to safer space. Abandon their homes. Abandon their dead. Just leave. A soft chime interrupted her reading. Incoming call. Jiwon accepted it, and a new holographic screen appeared. Her sister's face looked back at her. Yoonji was 42 years old, 3 years younger than Jiwon, but she looked older, worn down by pain and memory. Scars covered the left side of her face, the result of burns that had never fully healed. Her left arm was mechanical, a prosthetic that replaced the limb she'd lost on New Jeju. "I watched the council session," Yoonji said quietly. "I saw what they said about us." "I know," Jiwon replied. "I'm sorry you had to see it." "Don't apologize." Yoonji's voice was firm. "I want you to tell them tomorrow. I want you to make them understand what they did to us." Jiwon nodded. Yoonji had been on New Jeju when the creche attacked. She'd lost her husband. She'd lost both of her children. She'd barely escaped herself, pulled from the rubble by human Marines who'd arrived too late to save most of the city. Those Marines had been part of humanity's response. When the Council finally decided to act, humanity had already mobilized every ship, every soldier, every resource they had. They'd stopped waiting for permission and started fighting back. The war lasted 3 years. Humanity drove the creche back, world by world, battle by battle. The cost was terrible. Hundreds of thousands of human soldiers died. But humanity won, and the Council had criticized them for it. Jiwon opened yet another file, this one containing Council Resolution 847 Delta. The language was carefully diplomatic, but the message was clear. Humanity's response to the creche had been disproportionate and concerning. The use of nuclear weapons against creche military installations was unnecessarily destructive. The human military buildup was a destabilizing influence. "They wanted us to die quietly," Yoonji said, still watching from her screen. "They wanted us to be good victims." Jiwon didn't argue. She'd thought the same thing many times. After the war, everything changed. Humanity fortified every colony. They built shipyards and trained soldiers and manufactured weapons. They created defensive perimeters and early warning systems. They made sure that what happened to New Jeju could never happen again. The Council called it aggression. Humanity called it survival. Another chime. Another call. This one was from Earth, from the office of the Prime Minister. Daehyun Kim appeared on screen. He was 60 years old, gray-haired and tired-looking. He'd been a junior minister during the Creche War. He'd seen the reports from New Jeju. He'd watched the council debate while humans died. "Ambassador Park," he said formally. Then his expression softened. "Jiwon, I've reviewed your notes for tomorrow's speech." "And?" Jiwon asked. "I'm giving you full authority to speak freely," Daehyun said. "Say what needs to be said. Don't hold back for the sake of diplomacy." Jiwon felt something loosen in her chest. She'd been preparing a careful speech, full of diplomatic language and measured arguments. But what she wanted to say, what she needed to say, was much simpler and much harder. "They won't like it," she warned. "Good," Daehyun replied. "They shouldn't. What they did to us, what they're still trying to do to us, it's not right. Someone needs to tell them." The call ended. Jiwon sat alone again, surrounded by screens full of history and pain. She thought about Commander Hyejin Kwon, who'd led the human counteroffensive against the creche. Hyejin had been 30 years old when the war started. She'd been a cargo pilot. By the time it ended, she was an admiral, commanding a fleet of warships that humanity had built in desperation. Hyejin had died 5 years ago, peacefully in her sleep. But Jiwon remembered what she'd said in her final interview. We learned that the galaxy is not kind. We learned that help doesn't come when you need it. We learned that if we want to survive, we have to be strong enough to protect ourselves. Jiwon closed all the screens except one. It showed a current map of human space. 47 colonies, each one defended, each one safe, millions of humans living their lives, raising children, building futures. Tomorrow, she would stand before the council. Tomorrow, she would defend humanity's right to survive. She began to write. The grand chamber was more crowded than Jiwon had ever seen it. Every seat was filled. Delegates who normally sent junior representatives had come in person. The viewing galleries, usually half empty, were packed with observers and journalists from across the galaxy. Billions more were watching through quantum broadcasts, waiting to see what the human would say. Jiwon walked to the central platform. It rose slowly on its anti-gravity field, lifting her until she stood at the focal point of the chamber. All around her, in rising circles, 847 species watched and waited. She wore a simple black suit, no decorations or medals. Her hair was pulled back. She carried no notes, no data tablet, just herself and the words she'd prepared. "Thank you," she began, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics, "for allowing me to speak today." Her tone was calm, respectful. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as she could. "Yesterday, this council accused humanity of being belligerent, of being aggressive, of being a threat to galactic peace." She paused. "I would like to address these accusations with facts." A holographic display appeared beside her, responding to her neural implant. It showed the same images Velmathos had presented the day before. Human warships near New Sol. "You showed this yesterday," Jiwon said. 47 colony worlds with military defenses. You presented this as evidence of human aggression. But let me provide context." The image changed. Now it showed a map of the galaxy, with human space marked in blue. Around human space, in red, were zones marked as disputed territory or outside council protection. 32 of our 47 colonies are in areas the council has designated as beyond your protection zone, Jiwon explained. When we asked for council security, we were told these worlds were too far from council space, too difficult to defend, too expensive to protect. She let that sink in for a moment. "So we protected them ourselves. Is that aggression? Or is that simply taking responsibility for our own people?" Some delegates shifted in their seats. The Haxian representative made a clicking sound that might have been discomfort. Jiwon moved to the next point. "You mentioned our warship production. You called it excessive. You said we're building a fleet in secret." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "There's nothing secret about it. Every ship we build is registered with council databases. Every shipyard is listed in public records. We build ships because we need them. Let me show you why." The display changed again. Now it showed incident reports, dozens of them. Each one documented an attack, a raid, or an incursion into human space. Pirates, slavers, opportunistic species looking for easy targets. "In the last 10 years, Jiwon said, there have been 83 hostile actions against human colonies or human ships. 83 times we called for council assistance. Do you know how many times council forces arrived in time to help?" She waited, letting the question hang in the air. 0. Not once. The council response time to human territory averages 4 weeks. 4 weeks from the time we send a distress call until council ships arrive. By then, the attackers are long gone. By then, our people are already dead or taken. Minho, watching from the human delegation seat below, saw several delegates look away. They knew it was true. The Council's security network was stretched thin, focused on core worlds where the powerful species lived. So yes, Jiwan continued, we build warships. We build them so that when pirates come, we don't have to wait 4 weeks for help. We build them so we can protect our own people. Velmathos stirred on its seat. Ambassador Park, these justifications do not address the core concern. You refuse to integrate with Council security protocols. You refuse supervision. You're right, Jiwan said, turning to face the Velcrin directly. We refuse, and now let me tell you why. Her tone remained calm, but something shifted in the chamber. Delegates leaned forward. The soft murmur of translation devices seemed to grow louder. 15 years ago, Jiwan said, humanity faced an existential threat. The Kresh Dominion invaded our space. They attacked our colonies. They killed our civilians. The display changed. Jiwan had debated whether to show this footage. It was brutal. It was painful. But the Council needed to see it. The screens filled with images from New Jeju. The orbital bombardment. The burning cities. Bodies in the streets. Children crying in the rubble. Medical teams overwhelmed by casualties. The chamber fell absolutely silent. This was New Jeju, Jiwan's voice cut through the quiet. 2.3 million humans lived here. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, artists. They were families. They were people who believed the Council would protect them. She played audio next. Recordings of distress calls, human voices desperate and afraid, begging for help, begging for Council forces to intervene. We called for help, Jiwan said. We invoked Council law. We reminded you that we were a protected species under your charter. We asked you to stop the Kresh. The display shifted to show Council session logs, dates and times, 6 months of meetings, debates, discussions. You debated, Jiwan said simply. For 6 months you sat in these comfortable chairs and debated what to do. You formed committees, you wrote reports, you considered precedents and protocols and procedures. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. While you debated, 3 more of our colonies fell. While you discussed proper procedures, another 1 million humans died. While you worried about setting precedents, our children burned. The Threen representative tried to speak. Ambassador, the situation was complex. There were legal considerations. The territory was disputed. Disputed, Jiwan repeated. Our people were dying, and you considered it a legal complexity. She pulled up more records. Do you know what humanity learned from New Jeju? We learned that we cannot trust the Council to protect us. We learned that when death comes, we will face it alone. We learned that all your promises of security and protection mean nothing when it's actually time to act. Velmathos stood. That is unfair, Ambassador. The Council eventually authorized intervention. Eventually, Jiwan agreed. 6 months later. By then, humanity had already mobilized. By then, we'd already started fighting back. By then, we'd already learned that if we wanted to survive, we had to save ourselves. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegate after delegate. You call us belligerent because we won't disarm. You call us aggressive because we won't submit to your supervision. But I call it memory. We remember what happened when we trusted you. We remember what it cost us. The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers. Some delegates looked ashamed. Others looked angry. A few were nodding slowly. Jiwan wasn't done. Jiwan had maintained her composure for nearly an hour. She had been calm, measured, diplomatic. But now, standing on that platform surrounded by species who had failed her people, something inside her finally broke. You call us belligerent, she said, and her voice was no longer calm. It was sharp, cutting through the chamber like a blade. You dare to call us belligerent? Velmathos opened its mouth to respond, but Jiwon didn't give it the chance. You sit in these comfortable chairs, in this beautiful chamber, protected by laws and treaties and ancient agreements. You sit here in perfect safety and you judge us. You judge us for building weapons. You judge us for refusing to surrender our defense to you. You judge us for having the audacity to survive. She pointed at the Velkrin, her hand shaking with suppressed rage. Where were you when New Jeju burned? Where were you when our children died screaming? You were here, in this chamber, debating semantics, discussing protocols, worrying about precedents while our people bled. The display behind her changed again, showing new information. Lists of species, dates, attack records. Do you want to know what humanity really learned from you? Jiwon asked. We learned that in your galaxy, peace is a privilege. It's something you grant to species you deem worthy, to species strong enough to matter, to species old enough to have earned your respect. She pulled up the first record. The Dorani. 15 years before the Kresh attacked us, the Dorani were invaded by the Krell swarm. They called for council help. You debated for 8 months. By the time you acted, the Dorani civilization was extinct. 3 billion people dead. Another record appeared. The Hakari, 23 years ago, attacked by raiders from the Void Rim. They begged for council protection. You assigned them a task force that arrived 6 weeks later. Half their population was gone by then, taken as slaves. More records, more species, more failures. Jiwon listed them one by one, her voice growing louder with each example. 23 species, she said. 23 species attacked, invaded, destroyed while the council debated and delayed and discussed. Do you see the pattern? Because we do. She turned to face the entire chamber, her eyes blazing. You only help the strong. You only protect those who are already powerful enough to not need your protection. The rest of us, the younger species, the ones on the periphery, we're expendable. We're acceptable losses in your grand design of galactic peace. That is not true, the Haxian delegate protested. The Council protects all species equally. Equally? Jiwon laughed, and it was a bitter sound. Then why are all 23 of those species from the outer regions? Why are all of them young civilizations? Why do none of them have seats on your inner council? She pulled up another display, this one showing council response times. The data was damning. Core worlds received assistance within hours. Mid-region worlds waited days. Outer regions waited weeks or months. Equally, Jiwon repeated. You protect equally the way a shepherd protects sheep. You care about the flock as a whole, but individual sheep, they don't matter. If a few get eaten by wolves while you're busy elsewhere, well, that's just the cost of maintaining the system. Ambassador Park, Velmathos said, its voice stern, you are out of line. Out of line? Jiwon's composure shattered completely. Out of line? My sister was on New Jeju. She lost her husband. She lost her children. She nearly died herself because you couldn't be bothered to act quickly enough. And you tell me I'm out of line? The chamber fell into shocked silence. No one had ever spoken to the council like this. Certainly not a representative of a species as young and weak as humanity. But Jiwon was beyond caring about protocol now. Here's the truth you don't want to admit, she said, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. You don't fear human violence. Violence you understand. Violence you can manage. What you fear is what we represent. She gestured to the images still floating around her. Images of human ships and defenses. We're proof that your system doesn't work. We're proof that species don't need the council to survive. We fought the Kresh ourselves. We won ourselves. We protect ourselves. And that terrifies you, because if other species realize they can do the same thing, your entire power structure collapses. That is absurd, another delegate said. The council exists to prevent war. No, Jiwon shot back. The council exists to maintain the current power structure. You prevent war between major species because that would be inconvenient. But war against minor species? Attacks on peripheral worlds? That's acceptable. That's just the price of peace. She pulled up one final image. It showed a map of the galaxy, with zones of council influence marked in different colors. The pattern was obvious. Core species, protected and powerful. Mid-region species, partially protected. Outer region species, barely protected at all. This is your peace, Ji-won said. A peace where the strong thrive and the weak survive only at your pleasure. A peace where we're expected to be grateful for scraps of protection. A peace where our crime is not aggression, but self-sufficiency. Velmathos stood again. Ambassador, if you continue this disrespectful behavior, we will end this session. End it then, Ji-won said. But you'll do it knowing that I've spoken the truth. You'll do it knowing that billions across this galaxy are watching. You'll do it knowing that every species you've failed, every civilization you've abandoned, they're hearing me right now. She took a breath, steadying herself. Humanity will never disarm. We will never submit to your supervision. We will never again trust our survival to a council that has proven it values procedure over life. We will never be victims again. The chamber erupted. Delegates were shouting, some in anger, others in support. The translation systems couldn't keep up with the chaos. Lights flashed as journalists transmitted the speech across the galaxy. Minho watched the news feeds on his tablet. They were exploding. Every major network was broadcasting Ji-won's words. Social media across 1,000 worlds was on fire with reactions. Some called her brave, some called her reckless. But everyone was listening. On the outer rim worlds, on the planets that lived in constant fear of attack, on the colonies that had begged for council help and been ignored, humans weren't the only ones paying attention. Representatives from 24 species were already sending messages to their governments. The message was simple. Maybe the human is right. Maybe we don't need the council either. Ji-won stood on the platform, surrounded by chaos, and felt something like satisfaction. She'd burned every bridge. She'd destroyed any chance of diplomatic reconciliation. She'd probably ended her career. But she'd told the truth. And across the galaxy, people were finally listening. 3 weeks after Ji-won's speech, the council chamber looked very different. The session had been called to vote on humanity's supervision, but when the time came, something unexpected happened. 247 species abstained. 14 voted against the measure outright. The supervision proposal failed. Ji-won watched from the human delegation seat as Velmathos announced the results. The ancient Velkrin's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. The council didn't fail votes. The council didn't lose control. But they had. In the weeks following her speech, something had shifted in the galaxy. The outer rim species, the ones who lived on the periphery, had started talking to each other. Quietly at first, then more openly. They shared their own stories of council failure, their own memories of calling for help that never came. Ji-won's words had given voice to frustrations that had been building for decades. Now, sitting in his office on a Hikari colony world, Taejin Song watched the vote results with satisfaction. He was old, nearly 70 by human standards, and he'd lived through his own people's crisis. 23 years ago, when raiders had attacked Hikari worlds, he'd been a young government minister. He'd sent the distress calls to the council. He'd waited for help that arrived too late. The Hikari had survived, barely, but they'd never forgotten. Now, Taejin sent a message to the human embassy. A simple message. We would like to discuss mutual defense arrangements. He wasn't the only one. Within days of Ji-won's speech, 14 species had made similar requests. They wanted human military advisors. They wanted to learn how humanity had built its defenses so quickly. They wanted to know how to protect themselves. Humanity, still nursing its wounds from the Kresh War, still building its own defenses, wasn't sure how to respond at first. But Prime Minister Dae-hyun Kim understood the opportunity. If the Outer Rim species banded together, if they created their own defense network, the Council could no longer ignore them. More importantly, they could no longer be picked off one by one. In the Council chambers, Velmathos met with its closest allies. The Velkrin, the Haxion, the Threen, the core species that had run the Council for thousands of years. They were furious, but also worried. The humans spoke out of turn, the Haxion representative said. We should sanction them, expel them from the Council. That would only make things worse, Velmathos replied. Its ancient eyes showed something that might have been concern. The Outer Rim species are watching. If we punish humanity for speaking truth, even an uncomfortable truth, we'll push them further away. Then what do we do? The Threen asked. Velmathos had no answer. The truth was the Council had made assumptions for too long. They'd assumed younger species would always defer to elder ones. They'd assumed the threat of isolation would keep everyone in line. They'd assumed their power was eternal. Jiwon had shattered those assumptions. 6 months after the speech, the Mutual Defense Compact was formally established. 31 species signed the initial charter. It was a simple agreement. If one was attacked, all would respond. No debates, no committees, no months of discussion. Just immediate action. Humanity provided military advisors and helped design defense networks. Other species contributed resources, technology, and personnel. Together, they created something the Council had never imagined. A coalition of the weak, becoming strong through cooperation. The Council couldn't stop it. Technically, the Compact didn't violate any Council laws. Species were allowed to form their own defense agreements. But everyone understood what it really meant. The galaxy was changing. Jiwon returned to Earth a hero. The government offered her promotions, medals, speaking tours. She declined them all. Instead, she took a leave of absence and went to visit her sister. Yoonji lived in a small house on the coast of Korea, far from the capital cities and spaceports. She spent her days painting, creating art from the memories that still haunted her. The two sisters sat on the beach watching the waves. "Did I do the right thing?" Jiwon asked quietly. Yoonji was silent for a long moment. "You told the truth," she finally said. "Whether it was right or wrong, it needed to be said." "I might have destabilized the entire galactic order," Jiwon pointed out. "Good," Yoonji replied. "That order failed us. It failed the Dorani. It failed the Hakari. It failed everyone who wasn't strong enough or old enough to matter. Maybe it's time for a new order." Jiwon thought about that. The Compact was growing. More species were joining every month. But the Council hadn't dissolved. The old power structures were still there, just weakened. The galaxy was fracturing into two groups, the core worlds that still believed in the Council and the peripheral worlds that had learned to rely on themselves. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even stable, but it was better than before. A year after the speech, the Kresh Dominion made another move. They attacked a compact world, expecting an easy victory like the old days. They found human warships waiting for them, not alone, but alongside Hakari defenders, Dorani volunteers, and ships from a dozen other species. The Kresh were driven back within days. The message was clear. The Outer Rim was no longer easy prey. Jiwon was called back to diplomatic service. The Compact needed someone to represent them to the Council, to navigate the complex relationship between the old order and the new. She accepted, but on her own terms. She stood before the Council again 2 years after her famous speech. The chamber was different now. The delegates watched her with a mixture of respect and wariness. She wasn't just a representative of humanity anymore. She spoke for 31 species, with more joining the Compact every month. "The Compact doesn't seek to destroy the Council," she said in her opening remarks. We seek partnership, cooperation, a galaxy where all species are protected equally, not just the old and powerful. Velmathos listened from its seat. The ancient Velcrin looked tired. Change was difficult, especially for those who'd lived unchanged for thousands of years. And if the Council refuses partnership? It asked. Jiwan met its gaze steadily. Then we'll continue on our own. We've proven we can survive without you. But we'd prefer to work together. The galaxy is big enough for both systems. It wasn't a perfect solution. The tension between the Council and the Compact would last for decades, maybe centuries. There would be disputes, conflicts, difficult negotiations. But there would also be something new. Choice. Species on the periphery no longer had to simply accept whatever protection the Council deigned to give them. They could choose to join the Compact, to take responsibility for their own defense. And the Council, facing real competition for the first time in millennia, would have to change or become irrelevant. Jiwan left the chamber that day uncertain about the future. She didn't know if she'd prevented war or merely postponed it. She didn't know if the Compact would hold together or fracture under pressure. She didn't know if history would remember her as a hero or a troublemaker. But she knew one thing with certainty. Humanity would face whatever came next on their own terms. They would stand with their allies, protect their people, and never again wait for someone else to save them. In her quarters that night, she opened a message from Minho. He'd been promoted to captain and was now serving on one of the Compact's joint defense stations. His message was simple. We're ready for whatever comes next. Jiwan smiled and sent a reply. So are we. Outside her window, stars filled the darkness. Somewhere out there were 47 human colonies, safe behind their defenses. Somewhere out there were 31 species learning to protect themselves. Somewhere out there was a galaxy slowly, painfully learning that strength didn't have to mean dominance and that the weak could choose to become strong. It wasn't the future anyone had expected, but it was a future humanity and its allies had earned through courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to speak truth to power. And that, Jiwan thought, was enough.